What's the view from Beijing when you look at this meeting that took place here in Washington? A highly anticipated meeting, lots of pomp and circumstance, and at the same time, the United States decides to launch these missiles on Syria.
Well, frankly speaking, a lot of people were surprised with the timing of the airstrike against Syria while the two leaders were having their first summit. Many people are questioning at the time, whether that served as a distraction somewhat to this very important agenda between the two leaders over there. But in general, China does not have direct interests in Syria, not as much as other countries do probably. So it's more like an isolated case. Of course, China has its own foreign principle to follow that, like the spokesperson of the foreign ministry has said, China opposes the use of chemical weapons by any country, person, or group. And obviously, China is not in full support of like a military action unilaterally by any country, including the U.S. But again, it's really a problem, for the United States, for countries at the region, for Russia and Syria. But still, China would suppose, even for the chemical acquisition of the use of chemical weapons, then we don't have a full investigation. We don't have a full understanding or solid evidence of which party actually used the sarin gas over there.
Nathan, Foreign Policy magazine had something to say about this attack. It must have done so very quickly because there's a lengthy piece in the magazine, and it says, and I'm quoting here,
Sure.
Donald Trump's Syria strike may have upstaged Xi Jinping summit, but Beijing was only too happy to see the United States trap itself in the Middle East again. You were there while the summit was taking place. You were there when this announcement was made that there was an attack on Syria. What did you hear?
Yeah, I read that article this morning over coffee, and I smirked a little bit. It's a realpolitik version of what's going on. But yeah, I think China has made the distinction over the last decade or so to say, look, the U.S. has spent trillions on wars in the Middle East, while we've spent trillions lifting people out of poverty and development. And if you're looking at it in terms of realpolitik, then the U.S. has slipped in that regard. I would add one more thing, though. This Tomahawk strike. It was a complete 180-degree change in policy over Syria, not just in weeks, but in days, if not hours. And that showed the unpredictability of Donald Trump when it comes to foreign policy. And that must worry China and others, because, it may have been all smiles and everything at Mar-a-Lago behind me and commitments, but what if he wakes up and decides one day, well, maybe, I don't agree with it today, or see something on Fox News or another cable channel and decides against it. And that is not good. But I think generally also, just one other point I'd like to make, is that there are some in Beijing that are okay with the fact that now we have Washington and Moscow at loggerheads. A rapprochement between those two could have worried Beijing.
Oriana, you mentioned a moment ago that we didn't hear much about the South China Sea dispute. It seems like the Syria issue sucked the oxygen out of everything over the past 24 hours or so. Do you think that particular issue, the South China Sea, that can has been kicked down the road now?
Well, I'd like to say I fully agree with the point that was just made in that it's very unpredictable. When Secretary of State Rex Tillerson was being confirmed, he made a statement that basically amounted to threatening a U.S. blockade of the South China Sea in response, which would have been against U.S. policy and potentially an act of war. And then he flew to Beijing and parroted and mimicked some of the talking points of Beijing, which suggest an accommodation of the Chinese position. And so it's very hard to say, just because it wasn't brought up at this summit, what is President Trump's mood going to be tomorrow? One thing I will say is it seems that based on the appointments that have been made, based on the people he has hired, there does seem to be a strong Middle East focus. And I think this is unfortunate because the rebalancing strategy was going in the right direction because the economic, political, and military power and future is in Asia. And so based on some of the decisions he's made, it seems like he might be willing to kick many cans down the road when it comes to Asia, and that will be at the loss of U.S. leadership, I think, in the region.
That's right. We don't hear much about the pivot to Asia. Go ahead, Robert.
I agree with that. I think that is something that troubles me too, and that is there don't seem to be many Asian experts in prominent roles in this administration. And I think that the fact that Asia is going to be the future in terms of geopolitics and geoeconomics over the next 10, 15, 20 years and well beyond that really means that you need to have seasoned Asian hands in the State Department and other parts of the administration, and certainly in the White House. And I don't see this emerging. It might emerge because the State Department's really undermanned at this point, but it hasn't emerged yet. The second point is unpredictability. The Chinese really do have an aversion to unpredictable actions on the part of the United States. And the fact that this policy turned around so quickly from Trump deciding he didn't want to really play much of a role in the Middle East to this attack of these Tomahawk missiles, justifiably, in my view, on this Air Force base in Syria, a very quick turnaround, and it does create unpredictability. But the third point, one of your guests made earlier, I don't think it's right to equate this attack on a Syrian Air Force base with something the United States should do or is likely to do in a sort of back of the hand, quick way in North Korea. The North Korean situation requires a very long-term, thoughtful strategy. You just can't make a policy determination to bomb a base there overnight without really understanding the consequences of it for the Korean Peninsula, for Asia, and for the world. So while you may say the United States took this action, it was justifiable, it's really not a precursor, or at least it shouldn't be a precursor for some kind of quick, immediate action somewhere else in the world without giving it a lot more thought.
Okay, Robert, just stay with us. I want to just turn the corner now and talk about trade for a moment. The United States has complained about the trade relationship with China, accusing China initially of currency manipulation. It's complained about access to Chinese markets. It's also threatened to impose tariffs on Chinese imports. But now the Chinese news agency, Xinhua, is saying this. It's saying that President Trump and President Xi also pledged during the summit to, quote, advance negotiations on a bilateral investment treaty. So what are the options for these those differences that I was talking about?
Well, this is a very interesting question. The best treaty has been under negotiation for a number of years. And the sticking point of how long the negative list that China presents to the United States is, how many other items are on it. The United States has been arguing in a list, which is areas where Americans can't invest without certain restrictions in China, should be reduced. The Chinese have not reduced it as quickly as previous American negotiators had wanted. There are a number of other issues too. So I do think it's important that they continue on this track. On the question of currency manipulation, I think that it would be very hard for the Treasury and inappropriate for the Treasury to find China a currency manipulator. They've actually been intervening to raise the value of the RMB, not lower it. So you really can't hold them responsible for manipulating the currency down when they're trying to actually move it up, which helps American competitiveness, not hurts it. The third is the broader trade issues. There are a number of trade issues. There are intellectual property issues. I negotiated a number when I was in the State Department. They will only be done if the United States and China can sit down and develop a dialogue to continue the kind of conversations that have been held over the last decade or two and try to make progress on them. Threatening them with a 45% tariff is hardly likely to be conducive to a constructive negotiation. They should have a plan. I think they will develop a plan for making progress, but it's not going to be sweeping progress. It'll be gradual progress, as we've seen in the past.
Okay, Shindo, if we look at this summit, the objective was for these two leaders to get to know each other, to establish some kind of personal relationship. Do you think that was achieved?
I think that definitely they have achieved that. You know, even before the start of the summit, the two leaders had exchanged with each other on the phone and also with letters. So they had established a sort of very cordial relationship. And with this summit, obviously they have a much better understanding of each other, including their personality probably, and also their own teams to get to know each other. A lot of the members on the U.S. side, you know, are new to the Chinese side. So this is very important for them to get to know each other, to sit at the table, enjoying dinner, you know, have a chit-chat. And then I think that's very important to have a foundation for further or more, deeper exchange between the two sides. It's a cliche to say how important it is, how important understanding is, but it is really is true.
Okay, and that's where we have to leave it. Thanks to all of you for joining us. That's it for this edition of The Heat.